The morning sun cast long shadows across the grand courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Colonel James Morrison adjusted his crisp military uniform. At 52 years old, he had dedicated 30 years of his life to serving the British Army, earning respect and fear in equal measure from those under his command. His weathered face bore the marks of countless missions overseas, and his steel-gray eyes had witnessed things that would haunt lesser men for life. Morrison had recently been appointed as the senior military advisor to the royal household, a position that came with immense responsibility and even greater expectations. Today marked his first official inspection of the Queen's Guard, an ancient tradition that he took very seriously. The reputation of the British military depended on the unwavering discipline and precision of these elite soldiers. The Queen's Guard had been protecting British royalty for centuries, their red tunics and tall bearskin hats becoming symbols of British tradition worldwide. These weren't just ceremonial soldiers playing dress-up for tourists. Each guard was a highly trained member of the household division, selected from the finest regiments in the British Army. They underwent rigorous training and maintained the highest standards of military excellence. As Morrison walked through the palace corridors, his polished boots echoed against the marble floors. Portraits of past monarchs watched him from gilded frames, their painted eyes seeming to judge his every step. He had prepared extensively for this day, studying every protocol, every tradition, and every expectation that came with his new role. Nothing could be left to chance when dealing with matters concerning the crown. The colonel reached the guard room where 24 soldiers stood at attention. Their uniforms were immaculate, brass buttons gleaming like mirrors in the morning light. Each man held his rifle with perfect precision, their faces hidden beneath the shadow of their iconic bearskin caps. These hats, made from the fur of Canadian black bears, stood 18 inches tall and weighed over a pound. Wearing them required not just physical strength but mental fortitude to maintain composure under their weight during long ceremonial duties. Morrison had served alongside many of these men during active deployments. He knew their capabilities, their dedication, and their unwavering loyalty to Queen and country. Yet today, they were not his fellow soldiers but subjects of his inspection. The weight of his new authority sat heavily on his shoulders as he prepared to address them. Standing before the assembled guards, Morrison's voice carried the authority of decades spent in command. He spoke about duty, honor, and the sacred trust placed in them by the British people. Each word was measured, each pause deliberate. These men represented more than just military might. They were living symbols of British heritage and tradition. Among the guards stood Private Thomas Whitfield, a 23-year-old soldier from a small village in Yorkshire. Thomas had joined the army straight from school, driven by a family tradition of military service that stretched back generations. His grandfather had fought in World War II, his father had served in the Falklands, and now Thomas carried on the family legacy as a member of the Queen's Guard. Thomas had always been different from his fellow soldiers, though few knew the full extent of what made him unique. While his comrades saw only duty and discipline, Thomas possessed an extraordinary ability to read people, to understand emotions and motivations that others missed entirely. This gift had served him well during his military training, allowing him to anticipate the needs of his superiors and support his fellow soldiers in ways that seemed almost supernatural. The young private had been following Morrison's career from afar, reading about his missions, his decorations, and his rise through the military ranks. Thomas admired the colonel's dedication to his country, but he also sensed something deeper beneath the surface. Through news reports and military publications, Thomas had glimpsed hints of the personal sacrifices Morrison had made in service to his nation. As Morrison continued his inspection, moving from soldier to soldier with methodical precision, Thomas felt a strange stirring in his chest. Something about this moment felt significant, as if the universe was aligning to create an opportunity for something extraordinary to happen. The morning air seemed charged with potential, and Thomas found himself fighting an overwhelming urge to break protocol. The inspection proceeded normally at first. Morrison examined each guard's uniform, checked their equipment, and asked pointed questions about their duties and responsibilities. His reputation for maintaining impossibly high standards preceded him, and every soldier in the room knew that even the smallest infraction could result in serious consequences. The tension in the air was palpable as each man awaited his turn under the colonel's scrutinizing gaze. When Morrison finally approached Thomas, something unexpected happened. As their eyes met, Thomas saw past the stern exterior to the man beneath the uniform. He saw years of loneliness, of personal sacrifices made in service to others, of a heart that had been hardened by necessity, but never truly broken. In that instant, Thomas understood that this inspection was about more than military protocol. The colonel began his examination of Thomas's uniform and equipment, his voice maintaining its professional tone as he asked the standard questions. Thomas responded with perfect military bearing, his answers crisp and precise. Yet beneath the surface, both men sensed that this interaction was building toward something neither had anticipated. As the inspection neared its conclusion, Morrison prepared to deliver his traditional closing remarks. He had given similar speeches hundreds of times before, praising the guards for their service and reminding them of their solemn duties. Today should have been no different, yet Thomas could feel the weight of destiny pressing down upon the moment. The other guards remained frozen at attention, their eyes fixed straight ahead as protocol demanded. None of them could have predicted what was about to unfold, or how a simple military inspection would transform into something that would challenge everything. They thought they knew about duty, respect, and the true meaning of service to others. Colonel Morrison completed his examination of Private Whitfield's rifle and equipment, nodding with approval at the impeccable condition of every piece. The young soldier's uniform was flawless, his posture perfect, and his responses demonstrated the kind of military precision that Morrison had come to expect from the Queen's Guard. Yet something nagged at the colonel's mind as he prepared to move on to the final phase of the inspection. The morning had progressed, exactly as planned until this moment. Morrison had found no faults, no breaches of protocol, and no reason to question the readiness of these elite soldiers. But as he stood before Thomas, he felt an unusual compulsion to test the guard's discipline in a way that went beyond standard inspection procedures. Morrison's military career had been built on pushing boundaries and challenging his soldiers to exceed their own limitations. He believed that true discipline could only be measured when a soldier was placed under extraordinary pressure. The colonel had developed a reputation for creating unexpected scenarios during inspections, designed to test not just knowledge and protocol, but character and mental fortitude. Looking directly at Thomas, Morrison made a decision that would alter the course of both their lives. Instead of concluding the inspection with traditional remarks, he decided to issue a command that would put the young private's training and discipline to the ultimate test. The colonel's voice carried absolute authority as he prepared to speak words that would echo through the halls of military history. "Private Whitfield," Morrison said, his tone sharp and commanding, "I want you to demonstrate the highest form of military respect. Give me your most perfect salute and hold it until I dismiss you." The request seemed simple enough on the surface, but every soldier in the room understood the implications. A military salute, while a basic gesture of respect, took on profound significance when commanded by a senior officer during a formal inspection. The duration and quality of that salute would reflect not just on Thomas, but on his entire unit and the reputation of the Queen's Guard itself. Thomas raised his right hand to his temple with textbook precision, his fingers straight and aligned, his elbow at the perfect angle. His back was ramrod straight, his left arm positioned correctly at his side, and his eyes focused with unwavering intensity. This was a salute that would have impressed drill instructors at any military academy in the world. The other guards remained at attention, but Morrison could sense their awareness of what was happening. Some had served under him before and knew his methods. They understood that this was more than a simple demonstration of military courtesy. This was a test of will, endurance, and mental strength that could last minutes or even hours, depending on Morrison's judgment. As the seconds ticked by, Morrison studied Thomas's face for any sign of weakness or wavering. The young private's expression remained stoic and determined, his salute unwavering despite the physical strain that holding such a position would inevitably create. Morrison had used this technique before with other soldiers, and few had managed to maintain perfect form for more than 10 minutes without showing signs of fatigue. But Thomas was different. As the minutes passed, his salute remained as crisp and precise as when he had first raised his hand. Morrison found himself genuinely impressed by the young man's physical conditioning and mental discipline. The colonel began to wonder if he had finally met a soldier whose resolve matched his own demanding standards. The silence in the guardroom became profound as both officers and enlisted men waited to see how this test of wills would conclude. The only sounds were the distant chiming of the palace clocks and the barely audible breathing of 24 highly trained soldiers. Even Morrison found himself drawn into the intensity of the moment, his own focus sharpening as he watched Thomas maintain his perfect salute. 10 minutes became 20, then 30. Still, Thomas showed no signs of weakness or fatigue. His hand remained steady, his posture perfect, and his expression unchanged. Morrison had never witnessed such extraordinary discipline from any soldier under his command. The colonel began to feel a grudging respect for this young private, who was demonstrating levels of endurance that bordered on the superhuman. As the inspection continued into its second hour, something unexpected began to happen within Morrison himself. The longer he watched Thomas maintain his unwavering salute, the more he began to question his own motivations for issuing such a demanding command. Was this truly a test of military discipline, or had he allowed his own ego and desire for control to override good judgment? Morrison had always prided himself on his ability to remain emotionally detached during military operations and inspections. Emotions were a luxury that professional soldiers could not afford, especially those in positions of command. Yet watching Thomas's extraordinary display of dedication and respect began to stir feelings that the colonel had suppressed for decades. The young private's unwavering commitment to following orders, regardless of personal cost or discomfort, reminded Morrison of his own early days in the military. He remembered the burning desire to prove himself worthy of the uniform, the willingness to endure any hardship in service to something greater than himself. Somewhere along his journey to senior rank, Morrison realized he had lost touch with that pure sense of purpose and dedication. As Thomas entered his third hour of maintaining the perfect salute, Morrison began to see the young man not as a subordinate to be tested, but as a reflection of everything noble and honorable about military service. The private's face, though showing signs of physical strain, radiated a quiet dignity and strength that commanded respect from anyone who witnessed it. The other guards, still standing at attention but increasingly aware of the extraordinary events unfolding before them, began to understand that they were witnessing something historic. This was no ordinary inspection or training exercise. This was a demonstration of human will and military dedication that would be remembered and discussed for years to come. Morrison found himself facing an unexpected dilemma. His original intention had been to test Thomas's limits and demonstrate his own authority as the senior officer. But as the hours passed, the colonel began to realize that the true test was not of the private's endurance, but of his own character as a leader and as a human being. As the third hour of Thomas's salute began, something remarkable started happening throughout the guardroom. The other soldiers, who had maintained their own positions at attention, began to feel the weight of witnessing something extraordinary. Their initial curiosity had transformed into genuine awe as they watched their fellow guardsmen demonstrate levels of dedication that exceeded anything they had experienced in their military careers. Sergeant Major Williams, a veteran with 25 years of service, had seen countless inspections and training exercises. He had served in combat zones across 3 continents and had witnessed acts of heroism that earned men the highest military decorations. Yet he had never seen anything quite like what Thomas was demonstrating. The young private's commitment was not driven by fear of punishment or desire for recognition, but by something deeper and more profound. Williams found himself questioning his own understanding of military discipline and respect. Throughout his career, he had viewed such qualities as necessary tools for maintaining order and achieving mission objectives. But watching Thomas, he began to see discipline as something more elevated, almost spiritual in its purity and power. This was not mere obedience to authority, but a demonstration of the highest ideals that military service could inspire. Morrison, meanwhile, was experiencing his own internal struggle. His military training had taught him that showing weakness or uncertainty in front of subordinates was a failure of leadership. Officers were expected to make decisive commands and follow through without wavering, regardless of personal feelings or doubts. Yet as he watched Thomas maintain his perfect salute hour after hour, the colonel began to question whether true strength might sometimes require the courage to admit when a situation had evolved beyond its original parameters. The physical toll on Thomas was becoming evident, though his determination remained unshaken. Maintaining a perfect military salute for extended periods placed enormous strain on the shoulder, arm, and back muscles. The young private's uniform showed signs of perspiration, and careful observers could detect the slight tremor that occasionally ran through his extended arm as his muscles fought against fatigue. But Thomas's mind remained focused and clear. He had entered a state that athletes and soldiers sometimes describe as being in the zone, where physical discomfort fades into the background and only purpose and determination remain. He was no longer thinking about the pain in his muscles or the curiosity of his fellow guards. His entire being was concentrated on maintaining the respect and honor that his salute represented. During his 4th hour, Thomas began to experience something that transcended mere physical endurance. The salute had become a meditation, a physical prayer that connected him to every soldier who had ever served with honor and dedication. He felt the presence of his grandfather, who had stormed the beaches of Normandy, and his father, who had fought in the South Atlantic. Their sacrifices and courage flowed through him, giving him strength that seemed to come from beyond his own limited human resources. Morrison noticed the change in Thomas's demeanor. The young man's face had taken on an almost serene expression, as if he had found peace within the challenge rather than simply enduring it. This transformation troubled the colonel more than any sign of weakness or fatigue could have. He began to realize that what had started as a test of discipline had become something far more significant and complex. The guard room had become a place of pilgrimage, though none of the soldiers would have used such words to describe their experience. Each man present felt the weight of history and tradition pressing down upon them. They were witnessing a demonstration of the values that had sustained the British military through centuries of conflict and change. Thomas had become a living symbol of everything they had sworn to uphold when they took their oaths of service. Word of the extraordinary inspection began to spread through the palace corridors, though the details were whispered rather than openly discussed. Palace staff who had witnessed countless ceremonies and official functions found themselves drawn to catch glimpses of the young guard who had been maintaining his salute for hours without wavering. Even experienced courtiers, accustomed to the finest displays of British pageantry, were moved by the simple power of Thomas's demonstration. As the 4th hour concluded and the 5th began, Morrison found himself at a crossroads that he had never anticipated. His original plan had been to conclude the inspection with a few remarks about military excellence and dismiss the guards to their duties. Instead, he found himself trapped in a situation of his own making, watching a young soldier demonstrate qualities that challenged his own understanding of leadership and authority. The colonel began to reflect on his own journey through the military ranks. He remembered the young lieutenant he had once been, full of idealism and determination to make a difference in the world. Over the years, that idealism had been tempered by the harsh realities of military life and the weight of command responsibilities. He had learned to suppress emotions, to make difficult decisions without sentiment, and to prioritize mission objectives above personal considerations. But watching Thomas, Morrison began to question whether he had lost something essential along the way. The young private's salute was not just a display of military discipline, but a reminder of the pure motivations that had originally drawn Morrison to serve his country. There was a nobility in Thomas's actions that transcended mere obedience to orders, touching something deeper and more meaningful about the nature of service and sacrifice. The other guards were experiencing their own moments of reflection and revelation. Each man had joined the Queen's Guard for his own reasons, but all shared a common commitment to serving something greater than themselves. Watching Thomas maintain his salute hour after hour reminded them of why they had chosen this path and what it truly meant to wear the uniform with honor. As the sun reached its zenith outside the palace windows, casting new patterns of light and shadow through the guardroom, the extraordinary inspection continued. Neither Morrison nor Thomas showed any signs of yielding, though both men were being transformed by an experience that neither had anticipated when the morning began. By the 5th hour, news of the extraordinary inspection had reached the highest levels of the royal household. Palace officials who had dedicated their lives to maintaining protocol and tradition found themselves grappling with a situation that fell outside any established precedent. The Queen's private secretary, Sir Edmund Hartwell, had been briefed on the ongoing situation and was carefully monitoring developments while considering the appropriate response. Sir Edmund was a man who understood the delicate balance between military authority and royal protocol. He had served the crown for over 2 decades, navigating countless diplomatic challenges and ceremonial complexities. Yet the current situation presented unique difficulties that required careful consideration of multiple competing interests and responsibilities. The private secretary's primary concern was ensuring that royal protocols were maintained while respecting the military chain of command. The Queen's Guard operated under strict guidelines that had been refined over centuries. But those guidelines had never anticipated a scenario where a senior military officer would command a guard to maintain a salute for such an extended period. Sir Edmund found himself consulting historical precedents and legal advisors to determine the most appropriate course of action. Meanwhile, Thomas continued his remarkable demonstration of endurance and dedication. His salute remained as precise and respectful as it had been when first commanded, though the physical toll was becoming increasingly evident. His uniform, once perfectly pressed and immaculate, now showed signs of the extended ordeal. Perspiration stained his red tunic, and careful observers could see the slight tremor that occasionally ran through his extended arm as his muscles fought against exhaustion. Yet Thomas's mental state remained remarkably focused and determined. He had transcended the physical discomfort and entered a realm where his actions were guided by something greater than mere military obedience. The young private felt connected to every soldier who had ever served with honor, drawing strength from their collective legacy of sacrifice and dedication. Morrison, too, was experiencing a profound internal transformation. The colonel's initial intention had been to test Thomas's discipline and demonstrate his own authority as the senior officer. But as the hours passed, he began to understand that the true test was not of the private's endurance, but of his own character and wisdom as a leader. The weight of command had always been a burden that Morrison carried with stoic determination. He had made life-and-death decisions in combat zones, led men through impossible situations, and bore responsibility for outcomes that affected countless lives. Throughout his career, he had learned to suppress doubt and emotion in favor of decisive action and unwavering authority. But watching Thomas maintain his salute, with such extraordinary dedication, forced Morrison to confront questions about the nature of leadership and the responsibilities that came with rank and authority. Was true leadership about commanding absolute obedience, or was it about inspiring others to achieve their highest potential? Did real strength lie in never showing weakness, or in having the courage to acknowledge when a situation required a different approach? The other guards in the room were also being profoundly affected by what they were witnessing. These were men who had been trained to follow orders without question, to maintain discipline under the most challenging circumstances, and to place duty above personal comfort or convenience. Yet Thomas's demonstration was revealing new dimensions of what military service could represent. Corporal Matthews, a decorated soldier with tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, found himself remembering why he had first enlisted in the army. Like many of his generation, he had joined the military seeking purpose and the opportunity to serve something greater than himself. Over the years, the realities of military life had sometimes obscured those original motivations, but watching Thomas reminded him of the nobility that could be found in genuine service and sacrifice. Private Jackson, one of the youngest members of the Guard, was experiencing his own revelation about the true meaning of military honor. He had joined the Queen's Guard seeking adventure and the prestige that came with serving in such an elite unit. But Thomas's unwavering dedication was teaching him that real honor came not from external recognition, but from the internal commitment to excellence and service that transcended personal ambition. As the afternoon wore on, the guardroom had become a sacred space where ordinary military protocols had given way to something far more profound. The silence was broken only by the distant sounds of palace life continuing around them, creating a stark contrast between the routine activities of the royal household and the extraordinary drama unfolding within the ceremonial chamber. Sir Edmund Hartwell arrived at the guardroom during the 6th hour, accompanied by the commanding officer of the Queen's Guard, Lieutenant Colonel Pemberton. Both men understood the gravity of the situation and the need to handle it with extreme care and sensitivity. They had come not to interfere with military authority, but to observe and assess the implications of what was occurring. Lieutenant Colonel Pemberton was a career soldier who had served alongside Morrison in previous assignments. He respected the colonel's military judgment and understood his methods, but he was also responsible for the welfare of the guards under his command. Watching Thomas maintain his salute hour after hour, Pemberton felt torn between his respect for military discipline and his concern for the young soldiers' well-being. The arrival of these senior officials added a new dimension to the already complex situation. Their presence acknowledged the significance of what was occurring, while also introducing additional pressures and considerations. Morrison felt the weight of their observation, knowing that his handling of the situation would be scrutinized and evaluated by those whose opinions could affect his career and reputation. Yet the colonel also sensed that this moment had transcended normal considerations of military careers and professional advancement. Something profound was happening in the guardroom, something that touched the very essence of what it meant to serve with honor and dedication. The question was whether he would have the wisdom and courage to recognize the true nature of the test he was facing. As the 7th hour began, Thomas entered a state that few humans ever experience. His body had long since moved beyond normal limits of endurance, sustained by something that transcended mere physical strength or mental determination. The young private had discovered reserves of will and purpose that he never knew existed within him. His salute had become more than a military gesture. It had become a profound expression of everything he believed about service, honor, and the sacred trust between those who serve and those they protect. The transformation in Thomas was visible to everyone in the room. His face, though marked by obvious physical strain, radiated a quiet dignity and inner strength that commanded respect from even the most senior officers present. His eyes, which had remained focused straight ahead for hours, seemed to look beyond the immediate circumstances to something deeper and more meaningful. He had become a living symbol of the highest ideals that military service could inspire. Morrison found himself facing the most difficult decision of his military career. Every instinct trained into him over 3 decades of service told him to maintain his authority and see the test through to its conclusion. Officers did not show weakness or uncertainty in front of subordinates. Commands once given were followed through regardless of personal feelings or changing circumstances. To dismiss Thomas now might be seen as capitulation, a failure of resolve that could undermine his authority and effectiveness as a leader. Yet the colonel was also experiencing something he had not felt in years: genuine humility in the face of extraordinary human dignity and courage. Thomas's demonstration had revealed the difference between commanding obedience through authority and inspiring excellence through example. The young private was not simply following orders. He was embodying the highest principles that military service represented. Lieutenant Colonel Pemberton approached Morrison with careful respect for both the chain of command and the delicate nature of the situation. As the commanding officer responsible for the Queen's Guard, he had authority to intervene if he deemed a soldier's welfare was at risk. Yet he also understood that what was occurring transcended normal military protocols and demanded extraordinary sensitivity. "Colonel Morrison," Pemberton said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of years of military experience and genuine concern, "Private Whitfield has demonstrated exceptional discipline and dedication. Perhaps it is time to consider the broader implications of this remarkable display." Morrison appreciated Pemberton's diplomatic approach, but he knew the decision ultimately rested with him. The colonel had initiated the test, and only he could determine its appropriate conclusion. The weight of that responsibility pressed heavily upon him, as he considered not just the immediate circumstances, but the lasting impact his decision would have on everyone present. Sir Edmund Hartwell observed the proceedings with the careful attention that his position demanded. As the Queen's private secretary, he was responsible for ensuring that all activities within the royal household reflected the highest standards of dignity and honor. What he was witnessing certainly met those criteria, but it also raised questions about the appropriate limits of military authority within the palace walls. The private secretary understood that this situation would likely be discussed and analyzed for years to come. The story of the guard who maintained his salute for hours would become part of the oral tradition that sustained military culture and royal protocol. How it concluded would determine whether it became a tale of extraordinary discipline or a cautionary story about the abuse of authority. As the seventh hour progressed, Thomas began to experience something that can only be described as transcendence. The physical pain that had racked his body had given way to a strange numbness, as if his consciousness had separated from his physical form. He felt connected to every soldier who had ever served with honor, drawing strength from their collective legacy of sacrifice and dedication. In this elevated state, Thomas began to understand things about Morrison that the colonel himself might not have recognized. He sensed the loneliness that came with senior command, the weight of decisions that affected countless lives, and the gradual erosion of idealism that often accompanied the climb through military ranks. The young private felt not resentment toward the officer who had placed him in this situation, but profound compassion for a man who had perhaps forgotten what had originally inspired him to serve. This insight filled Thomas with an unexpected sense of purpose that went beyond simply following orders or demonstrating military discipline. He began to understand that his salute had become something larger than either he or Morrison had anticipated. It was becoming a reminder to everyone present of why they had chosen to serve, what it truly meant to wear the uniform with honor, and the sacred trust that existed between those who serve and those they protect. The other guards in the room were experiencing their own moments of profound realization. Each man had joined the Queen's Guard for his own reasons, but all shared a common commitment to serving something greater than themselves. Watching Thomas maintain his salute hour after hour was reminding them of the nobility and purpose that lay at the heart of military service. Sergeant Major Williams, the veteran with 25 years of experience, found himself reflecting on the hundreds of young soldiers he had trained and mentored throughout his career. He had always emphasized the importance of discipline, obedience, and attention to detail. But watching Thomas, he began to understand that true military excellence went beyond mere compliance with orders. It required the kind of inner strength and moral courage that could not be taught through drill and ceremony alone. As the afternoon light began to fade through the palace windows, casting new shadows across the guardroom, the extraordinary inspection entered its most critical phase. The physical and emotional intensity of the situation had reached levels that demanded resolution, yet neither Morrison nor Thomas showed any signs of yielding. The question that hung in the air was not who would break first, but what kind of resolution could honor both military authority and human dignity. Morrison realized that the moment had come for him to demonstrate the kind of leadership that his rank and experience demanded. The test was no longer about Thomas's endurance or discipline. It had become a test of the colonel's own character, wisdom, and understanding of what it truly meant to lead others in service to something greater than themselves. As the 8th hour began, Morrison made a decision that would define not only this moment, but his entire understanding of what it meant to be a leader. The colonel stepped forward, his own military bearing as perfect as it had been when the inspection began, but something fundamental had changed in his demeanor. The rigid authority that had characterized his earlier commands had given way to something deeper and more profound. Morrison raised his own hand in a perfect military salute, matching Thomas's gesture with equal precision and respect. The sight of a senior colonel saluting a private would have been shocking under normal circumstances, but nothing about this day had been normal. The colonel's salute was not a sign of weakness or capitulation, but a recognition of the extraordinary courage and dedication that Thomas had demonstrated. "Private Whitfield," Morrison said, his voice carrying a warmth and respect that had been absent from his earlier commands. "You have shown me something today that I had forgotten in my climb through the ranks. You have reminded me why we truly serve." The words hung in the air with profound significance. Every person in the guardroom understood that they were witnessing something unprecedented in military protocol. A senior officer was not only acknowledging the excellence of a subordinate, but was publicly recognizing that he had learned something valuable from the demonstration he had witnessed. Thomas felt tears welling in his eyes as he heard the colonel's words, though his salute remained perfect and unwavering. After 8 hours of maintaining his position, the young private was experiencing emotions that transcended mere relief or gratitude. He felt a deep connection not only to Morrison, but to every person in the room who had chosen to dedicate their lives to serving something greater than themselves. Morrison continued speaking, his words carefully chosen to honor both military tradition and the extraordinary circumstances they had all witnessed. In 30 years of military service, I have seen courage in many forms. I have witnessed acts of heroism that earned men the highest decorations our nation can bestow. But today you have demonstrated something equally valuable and perhaps even rarer. The colonel paused, gathering his thoughts as he prepared to articulate something that challenged conventional understanding of military hierarchy and respect. You have shown us that true discipline comes not from fear of authority, but from love of the principles we swear to uphold. Your salute has been more than a gesture of respect. It has been a reminder of the sacred trust that exists between those who serve and those we protect, Lieutenant. Colonel Pemberton felt a profound sense of relief and admiration as he watched Morrison handle the situation with such wisdom and grace. The commanding officer had been prepared to intervene if necessary, but he recognized that the colonel was demonstrating the kind of leadership that inspired rather than merely commanded. This was a moment that would be remembered and discussed for generations to come. Sir Edmund Hartwell observed the proceedings with growing appreciation for both the military tradition and human dignity being displayed before him. As someone responsible for maintaining royal protocol and preserving the monarchy's reputation, he understood that this extraordinary demonstration reflected the highest values that the crown represented. The story of this day would become part of the legend that sustained both military culture and royal tradition. Morrison slowly lowered his own salute and approached Thomas with evident respect and admiration. "Private Whitfield, I hereby release you from your salute. You have exceeded every expectation and demonstrated excellence that will serve as an inspiration to every soldier who hears this story." Thomas finally lowered his arm after 8 hours and 17 minutes of maintaining perfect military bearing. The relief was immediate and overwhelming, but it was accompanied by a strange sense of loss. The salute had become more than a physical position. It had become a spiritual practice that connected him to something larger and more meaningful than his individual existence. As feeling returned to his arm and shoulder, Thomas swayed slightly, but remained standing. The other guards moved instinctively to support him, their earlier distance replaced by profound respect and camaraderie. These men who had witnessed the extraordinary demonstration from beginning to end understood that they had been privileged to observe something that transcended normal military experience. Morrison addressed the assembled guards with words that would be remembered long after they had all moved on to other assignments and responsibilities. "What you have witnessed today is a reminder of why we serve and what we represent. Private Whitfield has shown us that true strength comes not from commanding obedience, but from inspiring others to achieve their highest potential." The colonel's voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom as he continued. "In my climb through the military ranks, I had begun to believe that leadership was about maintaining authority and ensuring compliance. Today, I have been reminded that real leadership is about recognizing excellence wherever it appears and having the humility to learn from those we are privileged to command." Sergeant Major Williams stepped forward and offered Thomas a chair, which the young private accepted gratefully. The physical toll of the 8-hour ordeal was becoming evident as the adrenaline that had sustained him began to fade. Yet his spirit remained strong, buoyed by the knowledge that his demonstration had achieved something far greater than he had ever imagined possible. The guard room, which had been a place of tension and testing for most of the day, was transformed into something resembling a sanctuary. The silence that had marked the earlier hours gave way to quiet conversations as the guards began to process what they had experienced. Each man understood that he had been part of something extraordinary, something that would influence his understanding of military service for the rest of his career. Morrison realized that his own transformation was just beginning. The colonel had entered the guard room that morning, believing he understood the nature of military leadership and authority. He was leaving with a completely different perspective on what it meant to serve others and lead by example rather than mere command. As the immediate intensity of the moment began to subside, Morrison found himself reflecting on the broader implications of what had occurred. The test he had designed to measure Thomas's discipline had become a mirror that reflected his own shortcomings and areas for growth as a leader. The young private's unwavering dedication had revealed qualities that Morrison had allowed to become obscured by the demands and pressures of senior command. The colonel approached Thomas, who was slowly recovering from his ordeal, but remained alert and respectful despite his obvious exhaustion. Morrison extended his hand in a gesture that bridged the gap between ranks and acknowledged the mutual respect that had developed between them during this extraordinary day. "Private Whitfield," Morrison said, his voice filled with genuine warmth and admiration, "I want you to know that your demonstration today has changed my understanding of what it means to serve with honor. You have reminded all of us why we chose this path and what we represent when we wear these uniforms." Thomas accepted the colonel's handshake with quiet dignity, understanding that something profound had passed between them that transcended normal military relationships. The young private had entered the inspection as a subordinate following orders. He was concluding it as someone who had inspired one of the Army's most senior officers to rediscover his own highest ideals. The other guards began to disperse to their various duties, but each carried with them the memory of what they had witnessed. The story of Thomas's 8-hour salute would spread throughout the military community, becoming part of the oral tradition that sustained and inspired future generations of soldiers. It would be told in training camps, barracks, and officers' clubs around the world as an example of the heights that human dedication and military discipline could achieve. Sir Edmund Hartwell prepared to brief the Queen's staff on the day's events, knowing that the story would eventually reach the highest levels of the royal household. The private secretary understood that this demonstration reflected the very best of British military tradition and the kind of dedication that had sustained the monarchy through centuries of change and challenge. As the sun set over Buckingham Palace, casting long shadows across the courtyard where the day had begun, both Morrison and Thomas understood that they had been forever changed by their encounter. The colonel had rediscovered the idealism and purpose that had originally inspired his military service, while the young private had learned that individual acts of dedication could have far-reaching impact on others. The guardroom slowly returned to its normal function, but it would never again be just another ceremonial chamber. It had become a place where something extraordinary had occurred, where the highest ideals of military service had been demonstrated and recognized. The memory of this day would inspire and challenge everyone who heard the story for generations to come. 3 months after the extraordinary inspection, the reverberations of that remarkable day continued to spread throughout the British military and beyond. The story of Private Thomas Whitfield's 8-hour salute had become legend, told and retold in military circles around the world. But the true impact of that day went far beyond the telling of an inspiring tale. It had fundamentally changed the lives of everyone who witnessed it. Colonel Morrison had undergone the most profound transformation of all. The senior officer who had entered the guardroom that morning driven by a desire to test and command had emerged as a leader fundamentally changed in his understanding of what military service truly meant. The colonel's approach to leadership had evolved from one based on authority and compliance to one focused on inspiration and the development of human potential. Morrison's new philosophy quickly became evident in his interactions with soldiers throughout the royal household. Instead of simply issuing commands and expecting obedience, he began to engage with his subordinates as individuals worthy of respect and capable of extraordinary achievement. The colonel started spending time with junior officers and enlisted personnel, listening to their concerns, understanding their motivations, and finding ways to help them realize their own highest potential. The change in Morrison's leadership style had immediate and lasting effects on military morale and performance. Soldiers who had previously viewed him as a demanding but distant authority figure began to see him as a mentor and inspiration. The colonel's willingness to acknowledge what he had learned from Thomas's demonstration gave others permission to be vulnerable, to admit their own areas for growth, and to strive for excellence without fear of showing imperfection along the way. Thomas, meanwhile, had returned to his regular duties as a member of the Queen's Guard, but his experience had marked him as someone special within the military community. Fellow soldiers treated him with a respect that went beyond his rank, recognizing that he had demonstrated qualities that few people ever achieve. Yet Thomas remained humble about his accomplishment, viewing it not as a personal triumph but as a reminder of what any soldier could achieve when motivated by genuine dedication to service. The young private's perspective on his 8-hour salute was characteristically modest. When asked about the experience by fellow soldiers and curious officers, Thomas would explain that he had simply been following orders and doing his duty. He refused to accept praise for what he viewed as the natural response of any dedicated soldier placed in similar circumstances. This humility only served to enhance the respect and admiration that others felt toward him. Thomas's demonstration had also opened new opportunities for advancement within the military hierarchy. Senior officers who heard the story began to take special interest in the young private's career development, recognizing that someone capable of such extraordinary dedication and discipline possessed the qualities needed for future leadership roles. Yet Thomas approached these opportunities with the same steady commitment that had characterized his famous salute, focused more on service than personal advancement. The other guards who had witnessed the remarkable demonstration found that the experience had permanently altered their own understanding of military service and personal potential. Each man carried with him the memory of what he had witnessed, and many reported that it had inspired them to approach their own duties with renewed dedication and purpose. Sergeant Major Williams, the veteran with 25 years of experience, began incorporating the story of Thomas's salute into his training programs for new recruits. He found that the account served as a powerful tool for illustrating the difference between mere compliance with orders and the kind of dedicated service that truly honored the military tradition. Williams would tell the story not to set an impossible standard, but to inspire young soldiers to discover their own capacity for excellence and dedication. The story had also reached the highest levels of the royal household, where it was received with the kind of appreciation that such demonstrations of dedication and honor deserved. While the specific details of royal reactions were kept private according to protocol, it was understood that the Queen herself had been informed of the extraordinary events and had expressed her admiration for both Thomas's demonstration and Morrison's wisdom in handling the situation. Sir Edmund Hartwell had incorporated the account into his regular briefings about the exceptional quality of the personnel serving the Crown. The private secretary understood that such stories were not merely interesting anecdotes but vital examples of the character and dedication that sustained the monarchy and the military institutions that protected it. The broader impact of the story extended well beyond the confines of Buckingham Palace and the British military. Word of Thomas's 8-hour salute spread through international military communities, where it was received as an inspiring example of the heights that military dedication could reach. Officers and enlisted personnel from allied nations incorporated the story into their own training programs and leadership development courses. Military academies began using the account as a case study in leadership, discipline, and the complex dynamics between authority and respect. The story raised important questions about the nature of military obedience, the responsibilities of leadership, and the ways in which extraordinary circumstances could reveal both the best and worst in human nature. As the months passed, both Morrison and Thomas continued to serve with distinction, but their relationship had evolved into something that transcended normal military hierarchy. The colonel had become not just Thomas's commanding officer, but his mentor and advocate, while Thomas had become a living reminder of the principles that had originally inspired Morrison to pursue a military career. The guardroom where the extraordinary demonstration had taken place became something of a pilgrimage site for military personnel serving at the palace. While no formal recognition marked the location, those who knew the story would pause when passing through the chamber, remembering the day when a young private's unwavering salute had reminded everyone present of the true meaning of service, sacrifice, and honor. The legacy of that remarkable day continued to inspire and challenge all who heard the story. It served as a reminder that extraordinary moments could emerge from ordinary circumstances, that individual acts of dedication could have far-reaching impact, and that true leadership required the wisdom to recognize excellence wherever it appeared, and the humility to learn from those we are privileged to serve alongside. In years to come, the story of the senior officer who commanded a salute but never anticipated the reaction would be told and retold, inspiring new generations of soldiers to discover their own capacity for dedication, excellence, and service to something greater than themselves. It had become more than just a military anecdote. It had become a testament to the highest ideals that human beings could achieve when motivated by genuine love of service and commitment to honor.